No, sir.
Can everybody hear me? I guess they can. Cheryl's speaking. Can you hear me now? We'll get started because this is a military unit up here, and you have to fall out on time or you get a few demerits. It is really an honor. Hello? Yeah. It is really an honor to be here, especially with the four people up here. I wrote a book about my father. The reason I wrote a book about my father were three of these liberators who liberated the concentration camp in Austria never got any credit for it, including my father's unit. And when I found that out, that really ticked me off. So I had to take rhetoric twice at the University of Illinois, so you know I'm not a writer, but I ended up still writing a book about it. And these three people on the right, and my immediate right, is Andy Sternberg, who was 16 years old, weighed 59 pounds when the other three people showed up and saved his life. So what we're going to do is, I'm not going to say anything. At the end, if you want to buy the book while they last, if I'm lucky to sell them, I'll do that and sign it on the outside in the foyer. But we're going to just let the three liberators and the survivors each tell the story of KZ Ebensee. And we'll start with Bob Persinger, which most of you know apparently, who lives here. And he was the very first liberator to enter the camp. And his story is unique. Besides Andy and Bob, there's Rex Kahn, who's from the Ozarks, Warsaw, Missouri, a show-me boy. And he was with the 30th Field Hospital, which was the first hospital that came in, and then my father's unit replaced his unit. And on the far right is Wanda Nordley, who was a surgical nurse in my father's hospital. All these people I found after I found out nobody knew anything about anything. And they weren't even on the internet. And they weren't in the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and even where they put the hospital together in Mississippi, the museum there had never heard of my father's unit. So, as I say, it ticked me off, so I did a little research and eventually wrote a book. And so first I'm going to introduce Bob Persinger, and he was a tank commander who drove his tank first into the compound where there were almost 17,000 prisoners who surrounded his lone little tank. Robert?
Good evening, and I welcome all of you. Tonight, there's a panel of speakers here that have a great story to tell. The terrible concentration camp in Ebensee, Austria.
Closer to your mouth.
I had a part in that liberation. I was a member of the 3rd United States Armored Reconnaissance Regiment, a cavalry regiment. We landed on Utah Beach August 7th, 2 days and 1 day after the D-Day, June 6th. We first engaged the enemy right after the Battle of St. Lo in France. About 32, 33 days later, we had got across France, encircled a number of Germans, the Nazis. Then we were up against a large battle, and the city of Metz had to be taken. It's a large city in France on the border of Germany, the Siegfried Line. Now it's September. The rains came, and it rained day after day after day. The rivers were flooded, the streams. We put extensions on our treads of our tanks so that we wouldn't mire down so bad, so that we could navigate. 2.5 months later, we captured the city of Metz. It is now the middle of November. The weather had been, as I said, so rainy. Now it turned to sleet and snow. And then here comes the Battle of the Bulge on the 16th of December. We had this terrible cold weather, and it continued to be below zero at times. About Christmas time of 44, and the first week in January, we had weather 18 below zero was the coldest days that we had. In the meantime, we're trying to fight a war, and the Germans were overcome and beating us and running us back. However, after the loss of some 20,000 Americans and 40,000 taken prisoner and 30,000 Germans were killed in this battle. Also, between 40 and 50,000 Germans were taken prisoner. One of the biggest battles the United States had ever fought. We did overcome all of that, and we are on our way now to back into Germany. We got to the Moselle River, which divides the two countries. Proceeded into Germany. We had some major battles between that and the Rhine River. We finally got to the Rhine River. Of course, the bridges were blown, and we went across on pontoon bridges. The Rhine River is a wide, rushing river, and it's near Mainz, Germany. That's a little town, which is very close to Frankfurt. After that, there were just pockets of resistance. The Germans had lost so many men and tanks and equipment in the Battle of the Bulge. So it was easy for us to go many miles every day, and we were on our way to Berlin. Now, we come to the city of Chemnitz, Germany, and we got orders to turn south and east to go down into Austria and southern Germany. The big three, Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Stalin, decided that they would let the Russians take the city of Berlin. We would mop up the rest and meet the rest of the Russians at the Elbe River. And that's where we were headed when we started down towards south and east, towards in Austria. The Germans started surrendering. Now it is now May. First week in May, the Germans were surrendering in droves. We never took their guns away from them or nothing. We just told them to keep going, and we kept going the other way. Then, on May 6th, I got the mission of following our reconnaissance platoon into the little town of Ebensee in Austria in the Alp Mountains. A beautiful, beautiful little place. We arrived there about 11 in the morning, and the civilians told us about a concentration camp. We never expected such a thing. Our orders was simply to go to Ebensee, outposted, and wait for the end of the war, because we knew it was coming. The civilians told us about this concentration camp. That afternoon, my platoon leader, Lieutenant Garber, would give me the orders to go up with my tank and another tank to the gates of the concentration camp. He didn't feel there was any resistance there, and that was the reason we went with tanks rather than small jeeps and armored cars. Got to the gates about 100 yards from the gates. It was a gravel road all the way. You could smell the smell of death from decaying bodies. The sickening smell. It got worse as we proceeded towards the main gate. Now this is up in the out mountains where there was tall pine trees. In the barracks, everything was built amongst them. Those poor people standing behind those barbed wire fences, it was not electrified then. It was prior, when the SS were there. They had left the day before on a Saturday, about noontime. And we got there on a Sunday at 2:45 in the afternoon. As we got closer to this fence with all of these people standing there in mud 6 inches deep or more, in filth that was there with it, we peered down upon them, and before we got there, really a few yards away from that gate, they looked somewhat like ghosts, because some of them are standing there with no tops on, no jacket, some with no pants, some completely naked, standing in that mud and filth, weighing some 65 to 75 pounds. It was an unbelievable sight. However, when we turned the corner to go to that gate, our beautiful white star on the front slope plate of the plant told those people that they were going to be free. And so pandemonium broke out, and I can't describe it, but Andy here can tell you how he felt. We pulled through the gates, went into an area called the roll called Square, and we shut our engines off, our tanks, and we peered down amongst those people, and some of them were trying to climb up on it, and this and that, and so we kept them off with our tank. And then I could not understand the languages that they were in. The celebration was something that I cannot describe, but we were crying. The sight of seeing those poor people, and I don't know how many thousand were facing us then, cheering and cheering and singing their international song, the French singing their national song. We started throwing our rations out. We had our weekly rations, but of course, just a few people got the treater for life because they hadn't had anything like that for years. Then a man stood beside my tank. I lit a cigarette, and the man says, "It's been a long time since I've had a lucky strike." I couldn't believe it. I was hearing English. And so I lit one and told him to come on my tank and get them. He was in better shape physically. He looked better and stronger. And there was a reason for that. So he convinced us to get off with our tanks and come around, and he wanted to show us the tanks, our 10 men. We didn't want to get down off of that. There was no resistance there. Our mission was simply to go up and see what was there And we could have returned and got right out of there and returned to our base. But we couldn't. So we talked with one another on our radios. We decided we would get down. The people started mobbing us, so to speak, all over us. And we didn't realize how dirty, how filthy, and of course their bodies was loaded with lice. We didn't realize that. So we continued going towards the kitchen area. We got into the building, the floors were clean, the utensils hanging on the wall. Everything was organized like the Germans did. They had their way of doing that. But there was nothing in there to eat. We went to the barracks. We opened the door of the barracks. The stench was sickening, absolutely sickening. We saw this mess, all of us, that we walked through in this terrible mud. And we got to the barracks. Some of them were so happy to see us. Others were just staring in space, no eye contact whatsoever. Of course, they were dying. We got out of that barracks, and I thought that was enough. One more thing, he says, we must go to the crematorium. We got close to that, and outside of that crematorium was bodies stacked up in cordwood around the outside edges, along the whole wall. We got inside the crematorium, and there, on the 3 walls, these bodies were piled up, waiting to be burned in this 4th wall, which contained the furnaces. There were still ashes as we looked in that. We just absolutely started, some of us, we all got sick, vomiting, crying. It was a climax of World War II for me. We had seen combat. We had seen men get killed. But this was the worst thing I ever saw. So I say it's a climax of my service with 3rd Armored Cavalry. The next day, immediately the cry went out for food to all of the Army personnel that was coming. As I say, we were reconnaissance. We were about 30 miles ahead of the 80th Infantry Division, which was coming behind us. And we were doing reconnaissance work for them. They all got food from bakeries, anything, wherever they could find food. Potatoes from farmers, wherever. And the next day, those big skillets and pots and things that we saw in the kitchen were taken down, and a nice soup was made. My captain told me, and he said, we must take the tanks back up there because we know those prisoners will overrun that food, the soup line. So we must do something, and I want you to fire over their heads when they start doing this. So that's what we done. They did start serving the soup, but they come to the troughs like hogs do to the trough, not paying no attention to nothing. They were so starved and they wanted some food. Then again, this is when we opened up our machine guns and we fired highly over their heads. And this did require their attention. Some of those that got the soup that quick gulped it down, and they went to the sides, holding their stomach and crying, and the next thing you know, they keeled over, and there they are, and they died there. Many of them.
What happened?
It was the wrong thing. We should have never tried to feed them that type of food. Andy can tell you about that. This was the most horrifying thing I ever saw in my life. Now, I was 20 years old, some 19.
And those trips to Ebensee and what I done, Ebensee comes back and comes back when things are quiet. I think of my military days, and Ebensee is my first thoughts. Thank you for listening here.
Thank you, Bob. Let me give you a little history of why Ebensee existed. The camp was built there so that they could build tunnels into the Austrian Alps. And the camp was ordered specifically by Hitler, where Nazi SS officer Werner von Braun, an American hero, who was awarded 2 awards by 2 presidents of the United States. And I have a personal friend who is died at the age of 92, was a very close friend at Cape Canaveral with Nazi SS officer Werner von Braun, who never admitted he was an SS officer. And my friend, to his dying days, didn't believe he was. But they built a series of tunnels, which Werner was to continue building his V-2 rockets and doing more missile research. And then the war ended, and then he ran as fast as he could west because he didn't want the Russians to get he or his crew of designers of missiles. So that's why Ebensee exists. It was built for an American hero. When Bob arrived, there were almost 17,000 prisoners there, and 8,000 had already died. So there were almost 25,000 people in a short period of time from November 18, 1944 to May 6, 1945. November 43. Our next speaker, after Bob and his recon group liberated the camp, then a field hospital showed up, and our next speaker is Rex Kahn, who has his own story to tell of what his experiences were there.
Well, like you said, I was with the 30th Field Hospital unit. They hooked it to. We were hospital units. There was three different units of the hospital. And as we went from Normandy Beach up through France, Germany, we were in Luxembourg, etc. And each platoon would leapfrog the other as the forces went forward. As Bob was telling you, one of my memories is of the Battle of the Bulge. When we got more prisoners, not prisoners, but patients in than we could handle. We only took in ones on an average that could not be transferred on back. Excuse me. But we were set up, and our last setup was in Hagenfeld, Germany, and as Bob has told you, we saw German soldiers surrender and come down the road 6 abreast, and they just kept right on going. They sent our outfit into Ebensee, and we were to take over the hospital portion of it, where these patients were in a lot better shape than the patients, or the prisoners that Bob explained to you. I did get to help with taking care of those that was in the hospital wards, and we were only there for maybe a week or 10 days, and our outfit was relieved. During the time, I took a number of these prisoners, over to get x-rays. We had no idea what was wrong with them. And we had taken their clothes away, we had given them showers, etc. But we had no idea whether they had pneumonia or what. But we took them to the x-ray. For those that could walk, I got over there, and one of the prisoners or patients slid down against the wall, complaining of chest wounds. And this young kid went over, and I tried to tell him, well, wait a minute, I'll get a stretcher. I'll get a stretcher, and he said, he's my father. He said, he's my father. And so for a short time there, the kid finally bent over, and his father crawled on his back, who can weigh over 65 or 70 pounds probably. And he carried him back over to the barracks. So then the 139th came in and relieved us. And so I had some time just to kind of hang around the city there and so forth. I went back up to the camp, and I took pictures of different things that took place, and they're in the book, of where they hauled these prisoners out by the wagon load and took them down through town and buried them in mass graves there. But later on, the 139th, after they cleaned up the mess and so forth that we got out of them, we were sent back in to ship out the last of the patients that was in, or prisoners that was in the hospital. So my job was to get these patients on litters. They had a number of ambulances back in, and they so we were loading these patients onto stretchers, and we went to put this one patient on. Put these patients on the stretcher, and this kid showed up. We were putting his father on a stretcher to go somewhere we didn't know where, in various hospitals throughout Germany, I guess, Austria. I thought, uh-oh, the kid's going to be left here, and there's no arrangements made for him. I said, get me another stretcher. Get me another stretcher. We laid the kid on the stretcher. We covered him all up. I told my guys, you don't have to excuse me. I told my men, I said, make sure these two get on the same ambulance. So that's my story as far as the concentration camp is concerned, I have one souvenir that a kid was wearing. He was hungry. And I looked at the ring, and I told him I would like, I tried to tell him I would like to have the ring anyhow. He understood. And I gave him a chocolate bar for this ring in 1945, and I'm still wearing it. And I'll never forget my experience there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The ending of the story and the boy and the father was that Rex's captain came over and chewed him out because he said the boy wasn't anything wrong with him. And what'd you say? Yes, there was, and the captain.
He said, Rex, somebody got on one of them stretchers that didn't belong. And I said, I wouldn't have any idea.
And our next speaker is Wanda Nordley, who was a surgical nurse in 139th Back Hospital. And her husband Don is here, and he fought in the South Pacific in Iwo Jima, and he was a fighting Marine. Where are you, Don? Stand up.